Well, welcome everyone to this morning's webinar on automating CAD and GIS integration. This is quite a topic that has been around for years and years. Just before we got started this morning, Mark, one of the long time FME or Safe Software staffers, was talking about, even before he joined Safe, doing this kind of work, writing awk scripts to do DXF parsing. But it seems like this is kind of a universal problem. Mark was commenting that we have customers on the call from around the world this morning. So thank you so much for joining us. So my name is Dale Lutz. I'm one of the two co-founders of Safe Software, and I've been working with data translation really for most of my professional career, which is getting to be more than 35 years anyway. Specifically started with Safe in 1993, co-founding it with Don Murray, my good friend, and we began early on dealing with the very issues that we're going to be talking about today. And I'm joined today by
Javita Chan. I'm a desktop technology expert. I've been with Safe for about coming up to 2 years now in June, and I just really enjoy working with CAD, really liked it in class, and now I'm working with it at Safe.
And of course, our host today is Stephanie Warner, who manages and kind of keeps us all organized. So thanks, Stephanie. And she also does the great job on all the slides.
Thanks, Dale.
And I'm going to put our two question answerers on the spot. So Mark Stokes, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, I've been with Safe a good long time and really enjoyed the work I've been doing here, right from CAD to GIS to still CAD to GIS, I guess.
And Chris.
Right, and I'm Chris. Just like Jovita, I started around 2 years ago, and I'm on the desktop experts team, and I kind of like to dabble in a whole bunch of different topics, so not really one particular specialty, but kind of all areas from CAD, databases, you name it.
Nice.
So
we also have, sorry, Dale, we also have Andrea actually on Q&A as well. She just sent me a message yesterday to join in.
Okay, excellent.
Hey.
I don't know. Are you there, Andrea?
I am. Good morning, Dale.
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
I've been at Safe for about 3 years, and I definitely do focus on the CAD side of things. So that's definitely my area of expertise, which is why I messaged Stephanie. I was like, can I join?
excellent. So glad to have you on the line. So just to everyone tuning in, please keep Chris, Andrea, and Mark busy by asking lots of questions as we go along and typing in, and they'll be pleased to be in touch with you. We do want this to be as interactive as possible. So, well, we've already covered off who we are, at least to some degree. And I'll get into a bit more about what Safe Software is all about and what FME is about as we go through. But then we're going to dig in and look at a variety of interesting CAD to GIS types of challenges that we've encountered over the years. We'll look at some, for each of them, we'll kind of dig in and kind of look at the bits and bytes. Then we'll look at some of the real world applications and case studies. And then we'll cap it with a bit of a more detailed demo, a more realistic demo that Jovita's put together. Once we do that for CAD to GIS, we'll rinse and repeat and do it going back the other way, GIS to CAD, and go from there. And then we'll finish up by taking your questions and answers. We will aim to stop at 1 hour from now or 55 minutes from now, but if some people want to hang around and talk a bit longer and ask us questions, we're always excited to do that as well. So just as we're going, just to kind of kick stuff off, go ahead and in the question panel, we'd love to know what kind of CAD to GIS integration challenges you face. And are you working with older tech like MicroStation version 7, the old IGDS? Who even knows what IGDS stands for? Impress us with your knowledge if you can tell us what IGDS stands for. Or are you an AutoCAD person? Do you use AutoCAD Map? Do you use Civil 3D? Are you using something more modern like 12D, which FME now supports? Do you need to move that stuff into GIS? Are you going into databases? Are you going into ArcGIS? What are you doing? Do you actually flirt with doing BIM stuff? Because that's something that's kind of modern, very, very modern design as well, technology. So really interested in what your integration issues are. Also, if you're starting in GIS, how often do you have to go back to CAD? And are you going to MicroStation, AutoCAD, or MAP, or Civil? What are you writing to? Let us know, and we'll be interested to gather that up. It does help us as we plan our product roadmaps.
I
So
just
just
want
a
to
little
note
bit of
quickly.
introduction to what this problem even is. And if you want to hear me riff on this longer, there was a podcast I was involved in a week or two ago, and maybe Stephanie, you can chat that out you can dig that up and chat that out. But it was all from the Mapscaping folks, and it was all about CAD and GIS and more of a kind of a high level discussion of some of the issues and perspectives. But CAD stands for Computer Aided Design. And as such, it's a tool that is started off being used to try to design things for people to build, but very, very early began to be used to help people make maps. And so the province that we live in here in Canada, British Columbia, was entirely mapped using MicroStation back in the day in a very careful way. And then over the years, that data found its way into other things. We've seen many utility companies around the world that have gathered and collected all their data using CAD, and then they want to take it in to GIS to do more complicated work with routing, outage management, these sorts of things. But those things need to be fed with the raw data, and that raw data often started its life in CAD. Now the challenge is that CAD is not, the A in there is not about analysis. It's about aided. And so really CAD is a wonderful drawing environment. It's for capturing the idea of what we want to build or what exists. It isn't about collecting detailed lists of attributes, at least not traditionally. So you end up dealing with styles and symbology, labels being on there, but not so much actually attributes being baked into data. And so this is where a lot of the challenges come when we talk about going from CAD to GIS, is how do we squeeze out or wring out the juice, the value that's inside those CAD drawings that may or may not have been collected with a high degree of rigor and spec. There's both ends of the spectrum there. How do we bring that in a way that's efficient into a modern GIS so that we can do an analysis? GIS users, of course, want to see geometry and attributes. They want to see columns. They want to see fields that have different domains and structure to them. More of a relational way of thinking. And they also care deeply about location. So coordinate system really matters. In modern times, a lot of times the coordinate system is floating around inside of these CAD drawings, but traditionally these things didn't have any coordinate system, and you had to know where things were, which is usually a shock to GIS people who are used to that knowledge being just baked in. Inside of CAD, often the connectivity might be a clue about what's related to what, and proximity also helps us. In GIS, these things are usually explicit. And of course, GIS is all about analysis. Once we get that data in there, we're ready to make use of it. So these two worlds come at the problem of expressing a map from different vantage points. And our job as a company that builds software for bridging this is to try to provide a set of tools, a set of options that allow these two worlds to coexist and flourish together, so that so that users out there keep using the tools that are best for the job without having to redraw or repeat effort. And that's really what we're all about at Safe Software. So SAFE began in 1993, way back in the beginning, helping the BC Ministry of Forests exchange information with local forest companies. And so the government had developed a format to be the format to end all formats called SAFE, S-A-I-F, and that's actually where our name came from. And so that SAFE format was meant to be the intermediary between the worlds of the various GIS systems that the BC government wanted to use and the CAD systems in use in some of the forest companies, and vice versa. They were also using CAD inside the government. So if you look at our graph here of all the data formats that we support in FME, we started off doing GIS and CAD. So this webinar has been a lot of fun for me because it's been a return to our roots in many ways. And it's interesting to me that those early problems really have never gone away. And actually, I'm very thankful that those were the first problems we had to solve, because they're frankly very, very difficult. And they caused us to build a tool so flexible that over the years, it could grow to take in all these other different data types and handle them and manipulate them, because we started with such a hard thing, the GIS and CAD. So yeah, we added databases and tabular data. And actually today our product is used in a lot of places where there's no GIS or CAD or spatial at all. People are just using it for boring old salary data and these kinds of things. XML was an early entrant there. We were joking before the webinar started about some future 8-hour webinar on all that FME can do with XML. I'm sure hosted by our co-founder, Don Murray, who loves XML, at least that's his brand. But yes, that arrived early in FME, and we're so amazed and pleased with what that has turned into today. And a lot of customers that are tuned into here may be interested in some of the XML dialects because their environments end up using them. And so today we now do indoor mapping, which is actually another kind of CAD revisited, but for often you take CAD drawings and repurpose them to data in there for strict indoor mapping applications. And lastly, wonderful things like augmented reality or artificial intelligence, all those things now in FME. So I went back on the Wayback Machine, and you can check this out when you get these slides later on archive.org. If you go back to 1996, you'll see this version of our website. And I remembered that we had an online demo. So this was 96, and we were doing data translation live. You could go into a form, click a few things, and turn a MicroStation design file through our wonderful FME using the so-called caveman logo that we had back in the day, and produce shape files, or actually GIF images that you could have seen being created online. We should have gone into web mapping back in 96. We would have been about 10 years ahead of everybody else, but no, we just thought that was cool and moved on. I did dig out the source code for that, and I found the original file. Oh yeah, whoops, I didn't want to do that. That would actually get us to the archive, but let's go back here. And the original file, I found the specs for it, and these came from the BC government, and this is the kind of thing that old CAD used to have. This is MicroStation, and so we have level codes and type codes and colors and weights and these sorts of things, and from these we can tell what our input is. And so in particular, I'm interested here that level 9 is a bunch of lines to do with forest cover polygons, and level 10 has to do with the actual data, which was stored in text that was in type 7 on level 10. These type 7 elements would have had the text or the node numbers that correspond with the actual polygon numbers. If you had those, and you could go look them up in an ASCII file and get the data. So that's the old spec. And if you look here, Jovita did this for me on MicroStation. She fired up, I know, that original old FC1 that we had on our website, and here's what it would look like. Lots of stuff in there. And in particular, if you zoom in, you can see the dashed lines or the dotted lines separating these various forest cover polygons on level 9 and 10. And so I found in my archives the actual old configuration dated from 1996, FC1 to SAF, to SAFE, and I fired it up on my Mac with a modern FME, filled in the various arguments that it needed, appropriately enough under the old data directory. Sure enough, it fired up like it was 1996, and we saw those comforting dots go by and got our answer. And so that's one of the things we pride ourselves on at SAFE, is that if it worked yesterday, it should work today. And sure enough, my old .fme file did indeed work. And so why don't we do a demo of this? And I'm going to go and let me just fire up FME here. And I'll start up Workbench. And I'm going to build from scratch this very ancient, at least a part of that ancient workflow. So let's go new, and I'm going to add a reader. And I know that it's IGDS is what we called it back then, which is MicroStation version 7. And if I go to find my data, it's all grayed out here because it's an FC1 file, which was an extension that the government used at the time. So I'm going to choose that. If I was being a good citizen, I'd put in the coordinate system. I happen to know it's UTM-10. I don't care about that right now. One thing when you're reading CAD, these parameters matter, and I'm not going to get into it, but if you're reading CAD and you're serious, you do need to look into these. I happen to know that master units are kilometers, so I should probably read these in meters. In subunits, that's pretty geeky and weird. The big thing here I want to do is not split multi-text. I want the old text nodes the way they were. And so I'm going to say to read that, and now it's going to pop up, and here's a list of all the levels that it knows. I don't want any of them except 9 and 10. So let's go for 9 and 10 and read those. And so now I want to use FME, and I want to ensure that feature caching is on. This is something that allows me to check my data at each step of my translation. And if I just go ahead and run this, I can basically quickly see what I have here. So it's loading it, and there are my lines and my polygons. So if I click on that, yeah, they're not polygons yet, they're actually lines. So that's fine. I'll just turn off the background map, and I am going to try to make these into polygons. So to do that, I just can start typing on the canvas to lay down what we call transformers. And these are going to be things that rearrange the data. And early on when we started, we knew we couldn't possibly know ahead of time what people wanted to do with their CAD data. So we needed to make it flexible. And that was why FME started off from the beginning as a very flexible engine that we would configure then for each situation. So I'm going to go ahead and build areas. And just like a trusty old horse or dog, 862 polygons. I remember these like they were yesterday. This was my main data set. And now down here, I've got polygons instead of lines, and that makes me happy. Next thing I want to do is work with this level 10 data, which are all these points. Now the problem is there's 862 areas. I only want 862 of these, and I got to filter them down because there's other text and stuff in here. And this is another key part of CAD, is knowing the various bits and bytes. We at FME have decided to represent every possible thing that's in that CAD file as an attribute. And if you want to work with it, we call it expose. So I want to expose the node number. I want to expose something that's called the graphic group. That was another bit and byte that we're reading. And I also want to expose the element type because I need to be filtering on these things. So I'm going to say yes and expose all those. And now I can work with these things on my canvas. If I want to know what they all are, and I can go and select something in my window. And now down in here, I turn on my feature information, and I can see all the stuff that FME knows. Like here, I can see that its element type is 7, for example. That's happy news. Somewhere here would be the node number. And so there it is, 179 is the node number. These are all the properties. And the data has more things than I can work with easily in Workbench because I don't want to expose all these things if I'm not going to use them. But I can go and expose them, and now I can work with them. So I want to filter this, and to do that, I get a tester going. And ahead of time, I've set up a preset so I can filter where I have the element is 7 and the graphic group is 0. And so it's an and so this should give me only the text nodes that I care about. Happy news, 862. Now I want to join those babies together. I do a point on area overlayer, and that's going to basically bring together any of these areas and the points that are within them. And this can be upsetting to many of you because I've crossed the streams. If you're a Ghostbusters fan, that's not good. So I'm going to move this down. That's a little thing that if you're OCD, you might like. Okay, I can tell everybody's more relaxed now. And now I'm going to go ahead and run to this point and do that overlay. Oh, I should probably check to see in this overlay, I'm going to count the number of overlaps. and I want to make sure that I'm telling it to merge attributes. So I'm going to bring the attributes from the points onto the areas. And there we have 862 areas. The overlaps, okay, there they all are. I'm going to get rid of the feature information window, and I don't really care about this stuff, but I do care on my areas. Do I have node numbers and overlaps? Yes. Let's just sort the overlaps. Each of them should have 1. Yep, the overlaps are only 1. And if I sort by the node numbers, it should go all the way from 1 to 862. And so that basically is what we spent the first 2 years of SAFE solving, and we just did it in a couple of minutes live for you. And so that's really an early kind of CAD to GIS situation. I could then go ahead and output this to a forest cover shape file, and the cover ID would come from the node number, and the map stand is the file name, and that gives me enough to join to the database to get the rest of the properties. So there we go. So what are some of the tips we learned from this? You discover the names that FME assigns to CAD properties by looking at the feature information window and selecting something, and then I used the tester to filter out what I wanted. You can also read our documentation where we explain in a lot of detail for the CAD formats what each of these names that we made up at SAFE are for the various bits and bytes in the CAD file. And then you have to have geometric operations that you can use to convert the representation that was in there in the CAD drawing for humans to look at into something that a computer can work with. You join it together with these various geometric operations. And again, we were very fortunate at SAFE that we started with this CAD to GIS problem because it caused us to have to implement a bunch of interesting geometric operations to solve these issues. And here in particular, I used the point on area overlay. And I've hyperlinked all these because afterwards, if you get these slides, you can click on these transformers. And actually, I will maybe do just one of them to show you that it comes up to our transformer gallery, and it tells me that POA, as we refer to it, is number 34 out of almost 500. And it tells you who are other transformers that are like this, and some examples and the documentation and so on. You can get at all that from that. Whoops, so I've lost my presentation. Yes, and so that was a bit of a deeper dive into actually using FME. Today, the FME platform exists in 3 parts. FME Desktop that I just showed you, which is where you author and build these workflows. You can use it for solving ad hoc, one-off kind of data translation things. It's really a data magician kind of platform that really, really increases your productivity if you're manipulating data. You can then take those transformations you authored and put them up on FME server. And I think Jovita is going to show us some of that a bit later, where they can be run automatically or in response to a web form. And then lastly, you can use FME Cloud to, if you don't have FME server in your organization and you don't have internal IT infrastructure, you can buy FME Cloud by the hour to use FME server. It's a very economical way to do that. We also have subscriptions that you can buy that give you all of our server and desktop technology, and you can use as much or as little as you want of that. And that's for municipalities or utilities, usually based on how big you are. And it is actually a very compelling value as well. So yeah, the idea of FME server is that you can automate these workflows so you can have them run scheduled or in real time. And so you map triggers to various actions, which can be, of course, running these transformations. So all together, our mission at SAFE is to help you maximize the value of your data, whether it's CAD, GIS, or otherwise. We want to give you tools so you can spend your time using your data and not fighting with it. And that's what's kept us coming to work for nearly 27 years now. So back to CAD to GIS. The approach that you kind of gathered from what I showed there was that we work to preserve as much information as we can and present it to you in the workbench environment so you can take and do with it whatever you want. So we can interpret all these styles and symbols and layer names and so on as attributes, and then you can work to improve the geometry. A lot of times CAD drawings aren't clean, so you can clean them up using the intersector or the snapper transformers in FME. You can form areas from lines, as I did, and then you can combine the geometry and attributes using proximity. And Mark can, maybe I'll cue him up for the end of the call to tell us some of the most complicated geometric operations he's done over the years. I've seen some amazing things where we slide text along a leader line to figure out what it really belongs with. Pretty much Mark has seen it all. As the great song says, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. I think Mark could sing that. Maybe he will sing it for us at the end. But this is really our approach. And so let's take a look at how this plays out for some other scenarios. This was just posted to our user community a few days ago. Let's imagine we've got a geometry layer and a couple of text layers, and we want to go from CAD to GeoJSON. And so Jovita gave me some screenshots. So here we have some labels inside of a CAD drawing. And thanks Township of Langley for your open data, and we made these files. So we got a couple of different layers that have labels in them, and then we have the polygons as well. And so I won't go ahead and run this right now, but I crafted this thing where we used the text property extractor to pull out the text string from the folio and PID layers, and the parcel layers go straight through. We do an overlay, merging everything. So that means we get folio and PID. Afterwards, we test that we have what we want. Some of the polygons are actually block areas and so on. So we only want the parcels that have two things in them, 2 points, which gives us our two labels, and that gives us what we need there with our PID and folio. And so that's the kind of result or example that we can have. So again, how do we do this? We extract the CAD properties into unique attributes. In this case, I used a property extractor. I could have exposed and renamed if I wanted to using an attribute renamer. Use the POAO to combine the multiple entities into one. And then often in these CAD things, you got to be doing sanity checking, because I don't want to be mean, but there's a lot of bad CAD data out there, and it needs a little bit of rigor applied sometimes as well. Hey, Jovita, did you want to speak to this one?
Absolutely. I tend to work with new users, and I find people tend to get overwhelmed with how many transformers we have. Dale has already shown you the transformer gallery, but if you can't remember 400 plus transformers, neither can we. So definitely use the transformer gallery, and you can filter by different categories. So if you're working with strings, you can be looking there. And oftentimes these are verbs with the ER added to it. So it's like if you're looking for a clipper, it's going to be a clipper. And you can also access this in Workbench in your navigation. It'll be called the Transformer Gallery, and if it's not visible immediately, you can go to View, Windows, View, and Transformer Gallery.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a pretty, I mean, really these transformers are like a bunch of Lego blocks that you can use to join together amazing things, and you're only limited by your imagination as to what you can accomplish, but there are a lot of them, and so part of the challenge is finding the one that works for you. You can also just type on the canvas, and that as you get to know things, that's how you can add them quickly. But thanks, Jovita, for pointing out this excellent resource.
No worries.
So scenario 3, we thought we would quickly touch on. Proximity wars, transferring labels to nearby lines. You can't go with containment only. And so this is a common thing where there's some kind of label or block, a symbol that's near a line, and then we want to transfer the information across. And so again, Jovita's taken some shots out of AutoCAD for us. And how does this end up playing out? Well, again, you use a text property extractor or expose something, and then you use the neighbor finder transformer in FME to do those matches. And there's a lot of options on the neighbor finder, and you can do things like only match if the angle is the same, and other kinds of ways to try to reduce faulty matches. In this case, I just needed anything that was close, and I was good. And I was happy with that one. So again, some tips on this one, that you can use the neighbor finder to do proximity matching, tester to, again, weed things out if there's not what you wanted. One transformer worth knowing about is the line combiner, which will take lines that are broken and maybe shouldn't be, if they both are the same road and you can tell by them having the same attributes, maybe we should join them together into a longer line so that we have a smaller data set. And that's a common thing that's done on the way into GIS as well. And sometimes some folks call that pseudo-node removal. And I'm really curious if anybody out there has ever heard of pseudo-nodes. And if they want to tell us what they are, that would be fun to see who knows, who's an old timer that's tuned in today. I'll also mention, I'm not opening up these various workspaces and showing you. We will supply all this afterwards so you can dig in and look at my and Jovita's amazing examples, and learn from them. But these are toy examples with data we created ourselves, but they illustrate things we've seen over and over again over the years, and you can use them to learn concepts and build up from that. Okay, scenario 4. Well, this is one that we've seen over the years all too often, and there's 2 variations to sort of the lack of data model or else extreme data model that we find inside of CAD files. One is where, and this would be an AutoCAD thing, there was no naming specification followed. So we have roads, we have streets, we have street lines, and so on, and we want to try to make sense out of this. And we've got hundreds of these files that are like this, and we want to try to understand what we've got and deal with that. Variation 2 is sort of the exact opposite, where we have a very rigorous spec. And so we have layer names that are in fact made up of various properties. So the attributes have been encoded in the layer names. And so you get something like this, where you have a 3-letter character code, then you have 8 digits for the date of last update, and then you have some kind of collection method that's the last 2. Whoops. And so so then anyway, that's the two kind of extreme ends of the schema madness that there can be. So what are we going to do about it? So variation 1, one thing to know is that if you're working with a bunch of files in FME, you can always put an asterisk in when we ask for a data set. And that means expand that out to all of them. So I have a directory called Roadmania that has all these roads in it. And I'm going to say star.dwg so I can read them all in one shot. I can actually also go */star.dwg, and that will look down all the subdirectories and do one massive merge, if that would be what you're going after. And when I bring this up, it looks like he looked up every synonym word road and named their layers after that. And in fact, that might have happened. But anyway, this is a set of roads that have got a whole bunch of wacky names. And so from that, we have to figure out what we're going to do. So first of all, what we're going to do is these into what we're going to make use of them called a single merged feature type. I don't want to have those layers as a separate left-hand side of my space. I'm going to bring them on one thing. And so that's clicking that box I've highlighted there when I add things in. And so that gives me what's shown on the left, a single reader feature type, or a single reader thing that's going to have an attribute called FME feature type. It would also have one called AutoCAD layer name, but it's the same thing. I can put that into a duplicate filter, and then I output them to Excel. And then I loaded up the layer names, and I got an Excel file with that. That lets me go and clean it up. So it came in and it was all these things in there. Just went and did a nice all road. And so now I've got a mapping from layers to desired. Now, if you had a bunch of stuff in there, a human would have to go and figure out what is the spec we want and put that in on the right-hand side, and then I can get a renaming table from the crazy spec I've got to whatever I really want. And now I can go ahead and apply that by data and use a transformer called a database joiner to read the Excel, and I have it joining on the layer name to the feature type and outputting the desired layer. Now I'm fanning out, is what I call it. Go into this feature. It says I choose an attribute value to use for the output layer name, And that's going to rename, if I'm going AutoCAD to AutoCAD, I'm cleaning this up by renaming all the layers to what we now think are better. We could go to a GIS with cleaning up, but nonetheless, this is a concept that's worth you knowing. So a couple things there. We discover what's in the data using FME, outputting it to Excel, then we can apply kind of a cleanup afterwards.
So I get a single merge feature type. I got these name mappings. Oh yeah, I had done all this. The variation 2 was this crazy layer name business. And what I did then was create a spreadsheet that maps the codes for the method to what they really were supposed to be, and the codes for the types to what they really were. Again, some good Swedish data. And then you can solve this kind of a problem, decode these attributes by reading everything as a merged feature type, going into an attribute splitter to carve this up into 3 pieces, joining to get the codes for the names and the types, and then outputting in a shapefile, and we see the results down at the bottom decoded. So that is a kind of scenario we've seen before. So what are some of the tips? Use FME to get you all the layer names if you have this kind of a problem, and duplicate filter is a good friend. Create a spreadsheet to map them. Otherwise, for the variation 2, use an attribute splitter, and then again, you use the database joiner to get where you needed to go. And so now we get into what are people actually doing with this. And so the city of Henderson is a great example. We have many cities that do things with FME, but they made a self-serve CAD data upload system that allows them to validate and integrate into GIS. And so, Jovita, are you able to speak to this?
So this is AutoCAD to ArcGIS Online. This is the digital plan submission, and this is to reduce duplicating work. This is to reduce risk of human error and just saving you a lot of time. So I'm going to hit next here. There we go. This is my source data. You guys recognize this already, as Dale's been using the City of Langley data, or Township of Langley data. And I've gone in, and as a very newbie CAD drafter, I have created some giant lots, some terrible giant lots. And these are actually all lines, so they're not polygons. We're going to see that a lot of things aren't actually snapping to. You can see I've got some parcel IDs inside these polygons, or not polygons, and I've got some street names. So we're focusing primarily on this little area here. So I'm going to implement a few CAD standards, and for this simplified demo, I've chosen to focus on the schema layer, or the layer schema. So the layer names, I'm going to look for specific layer naming. I'm going to look for certain geometries off of these layers, such as roads being lines, and parcels containing IDs, and parcels being polygons. I'm going to actually remove that blocks not exploded part there. So with that, I'm going to walk us over to FME Server. So far what we've been seeing is on the desktop side. An FME Server, as Dale has already mentioned, is another product in FME, and this extends the functionality of desktop. It lets you automate your workflows, string workflows together responsively in response to a trigger. And what we're looking at today are server apps. So I'm going to move over to there, manage my apps, and look at that. I've got CAD validation. I'm going to hit view here. And we've got this lovely portal for our users to upload our CAD files. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my file from my local desktop. I've got my Langley development plan. I'm just going to drag and drop that in there. So I see it's 100% uploaded. I'm going to press OK. OK. So what this is doing is it's submitting my data to a workspace on desktop. So this is powered by a workspace. And then it looks like, because I haven't drawn it very well, your file doesn't seem to meet the necessary CAD standards. So I get this report back, and it tells me these are the layers that I've got. And these are the layers that I'm expected to have. So you can see I've got some underscores instead of dashes, and I'm just missing a whole bunch of things. I've also got geometry. Ooh, I have something that isn't text where it should be, and that should be my annotation. So how does this actually work? Let's go into desktop and take a look at the workspace that powers this. This workspace looks a little bit bigger, but we're going to power through it by the bookmarks. So don't get too hung up on what the actual transformer is doing. We've got our reader here, which we already recognize in our transformers, and that's what we need to know. So this is a demo of validating CAD file for submission, going from AutoCAD to ArcGIS Online. And failing that, we want to write out to HTML. So this is our source data here. I'm going to go ahead and run this. Actually wanted to run that with, yep, I have enabled feature caching. Going to give that a second here. Take a look at our source data. It's always more exciting in the inspector than in a screenshot. I'm sorry I wasn't able to pull up AutoCAD. I don't have it on my computer, and it would slow us down further if I connected to VPN. And let's turn our background map on. I'm going to zoom in here, let that load. And this is what we're focusing on, and just really quickly to show you that these are lines and not polygons. All right, so in this first part here, we're reading in our data, and then we're filtering it by the expected layer names that we want. As you can see, a lot of things are unfiltered and only parcels and annotation is matching. So how do we deal with that unfiltered? What is in it? I'm going to close this out so we can zoom in farther here. So we've got a duplicate filter, which you've already seen Dale show. And this is creating a report to tell you what the expected layers are, which is in our Excel sheet here. And then comparing it with what we actually have. So we're grabbing one of each layer that hasn't been filtered. I've got a bunch of geometry filters here to check that certain layers have certain geometries. So all of my parcels, I expect them to be areas, and I expect my roads to be lines, text to be text, of course, and that blocks aren't exploded is something that you can test as well. It'll come into FME as a point if it is not exploded. Next, I'm testing to see if any features are coming out. So if anything comes out of unfiltered, I already want to not be writing to ArcGIS Online. I don't want anything that fails the standard is no good. So this is just creating a few more messages for us, a little bit more information to let us know what's gone wrong, and write that out in a report. Gone the wrong way. In this bookmark here, we're testing to see that we haven't gotten anything coming through the unfiltered port. And if that is true, we're going to write out to ArcGIS Online. And to do that, Dale has already shown you a lot of this, so you guys recognize the neighbor finder already. And this is where I'm grabbing those street names and putting them on the line. The point on area over layer is also something you've seen a few times now, and that is grabbing that parcel ID inside the polygon and putting it on the polygon itself. We've also dealt with the polygons in here, so they're no longer lines. And then finally, we're writing out to HTML. So I'm going to zoom out here a little bit just to get the big picture of it. And as you can see, going through the top, it means something's gone wrong, and we're writing out to HTML. Going through the bottom here, it means that everything worked out, it passed all the standards I've set, and it's writing out to ArcGIS Online. And because I want some feedback when I've submitted this, I've also created a report to show success. So how does this go into server? How does it connect? I have published this workspace as a data streaming service, and I'm just going to run through that very quickly. The dialog runs you through it, so don't hesitate to give that a try. I've connected to a cloud instance, so I'm actually using FME server on FME cloud. I'm going to hit next here, and then from here I can upload my workspace, and I'm going to give this another name just so we don't override that. You can upload your connections. And then here, I am looking for a data streaming service. So that's going to stream HTML back to me. I'm going to cancel out of there, and we're going to go back into FME server. So in here, we can check, you can check in your workspaces and view those to see that it actually has published your workspace, but I'm going to skip that for now and go to my CAD validation again. So using FME, I've fixed up that file that we had that wasn't so great. And I'm going to just drop that in now and see what happens. So creating this app is really easy. It just runs through a dialog. I get to give it a title. I can select the color in the background, give it an icon, and then press OK here and let that run because it might take a little bit longer going to ArcGIS Online. Another option for this, I could have used automations, which would have logically set up my workflows so that one would run after the other. And if, let's say, my standard check failed, I could process a different workspace. Or if it succeeded, I could process the workspace that would run it to AGL. Okay, so we've got a success, and I just quickly want to show you what that looks like in ArcGIS Online. So I'm going to refresh this. I did write the feature service out recently, so that says May 12th, but we're going to go in and see the updated version. Okay, click through the data. I wrote out to roads and parcels, so I want to check that my roads layer has those names. Yep, so I've got my Darth Vader Street, Janeway Boulevard, and Akbar Avenue. For those Star Trek and Star Wars fans out there. We just had May 4th recently, and a little trivia. So I'm not worried about this because I didn't have parcel ID on my existing parcels. So I'm going to sort this by descending, and I expect to find 54 parcels. So there those are, and those were my newly created. And I'm going to head back to the slides. Dale, would you like to pick up here?
Sure. Yes. I'm sure that those tuning in from the Lower Mainland, and especially Langley, will be excited to see that we're planning to do a big development in some parkland here in Fort Langley. So the second half of this webinar, which we have 2 minutes to do, it's not really the second half. It's a much shorter story going back from GIS to CAD. So when you're going back to CAD, you want to try to create a visually appealing CAD drawing that represents the intelligence that was in the GIS and somehow create symbology that's useful for the CAD person. Often you're creating a CAD drawing that is meant to basically match a spec that your CAD end user is needing to see followed. So these are the kinds of things that we see happen. And so actually, I did tweet about this. Gävle in Sweden is famous for its Christmas goat that about every second year gets burnt down. But that was the place where we first went into Europe and first used FME. There was two things in that same city. One was the National Mapping Agency of Sweden, who were one of the first, well, the first customer. And then the second customer was actually the city of Gävle, who were absolutely early adopters of the Esri SDE. And they wanted to go from SDE back to CAD and preserve things. And so I actually reached out to them. Several of the folks I worked with then were retired, but one was able to be reached, and they supplied me the original file that we used as our template that had the block definitions in it. And so the input that we have, and this comes from the Gävle open data, are some streets and tree locations. If you're Swedish, you can fact check me on that, but it's close enough. And so to actually pull this off, we go from from GIS to CAD. You know what? Since we're running late anyway, and we're not even going to try to finish on time, I'm going to just fire this up and show you just how easy this is. So I'm doing 6, Gävle to CAD. The DWG styler is what is used today to be able to place blocks or other things. So I got to give it the template file that has my blocks in it, and then I can hit this ... It goes out there and it finds all the different blocks. And I remember fondly staket, however you pronounce it, that means fence in Swedish, and we used to place those. And it used to take a long time to do it, but here we pop down one transformer and then out we go. And I have also indicated that I wanted to save the attribute data. And if I go into the parameters here, down in here, I can say something about what kind of attribute data do we want saved. So I can say output the defined attributes only. And then down here, I say I want to output them as extended entity data, or I could do it as inserts in an old style way as well. So anyway, that's how that works. And then the second database joiner is going to a table that goes from the type code to the line and color that we want to use. So we end up doing a lookup in that way. So that's how we do it, and we get this kind of output where these roads are all colored in some wild and crazy way based on their type code, and we can zoom in and see these various symbols that we created. Just one quick example of CAD to GIS. Now, what are some tips? So if you're doing this, make sure to use those styler transformers or go to a lookup table like I showed there with the database, either a spreadsheet that has all the lookups, or if there's just a few of them, put them explicitly in using a styler. If you need to make labels, FME has a couple of labeling things, a label point replacer, which gives you something inside, versus a labeler, which will go along a line and make points. If you have some extra money, you can try, and you have exacting needs, the map text labeler will give results that are going to blow away anything we can do, and that's a plugin that you can buy from us for extra cost that does make great labels. You can see some of the results. If you go to that link afterwards, you can follow it and see videos and tutorials on how this thing works. It's pretty amazing. And I think with that, I'm handing back to Jovita.
Sounds good.
You can close us down.
All right. So I've got one last quick demo to show, and I did realize I had missed showing you guys the actual results, which sort of takes the joy away from it. But here are my polygons, my parcel polygons, and I've got my IDs in there.
Right now, the Fort Langley people are starting a petition against you, Jovita.
Good thing I'm not a developer. All right, so the problem here is GIS-to-CAD, and we're looking at self-serve data requests. So often I've heard from companies that they have a bit of a bottleneck where they have one GIS person or a couple, and somebody requests GIS data and they can't get it immediately. And so they're left waiting, and this one person has to basically authorize that access or get that data to them. So the solution is self-serve data, and we're going to take a look at that in another FME server app. And this time we are looking at Trails data. It's the data selection was a little bit selfishly motivated. I was looking at places to take my cat for a walk. So the data download. And I mentioned you can add an image in the header there. So what this does is I get to select a rectangle, a bounding box of the area I want in Surrey to grab Trails data from a shapefile to CAD data. I'm going to zoom in there. I've got a default rectangle in there in case I wanted to run it without selecting. And I'm just going to erase that, create a box, make sure I grab all of that, and I'm going to press confirm. So once again, this runs a workspace from FME desktop, and that was super quick. I get this download link. I'm going to save that file, and we're going to open up an FME data inspector. So we mentioned that one of the issues when we're going from GIS to CAD is that we don't want to be losing attributes. And we are going to take a look at that now. Today at 9:04, I just need to let this grab my zip files. And that's my most recent one. Press open. And something important here is to switch it over to attribute schema so we can actually see those. I'm going to press OK. You are seeing my FME in dark mode. I forgot to mention this earlier, but since 2019 and higher, we do have dark mode, and I live my life in dark mode. It is excellent. I'm going to expand this. And as you can see, we've got lots of different types of trails. I've created different layers off of the trail types. And I think some safers would be happy to know that we do have some equestrian trails down on the bottom there. Just going to pan a little bit and zoom in. And those are equestrian trails. So let's take a look at the workspace that actually powers this. This is a smaller workspace. Everybody, deep sigh of relief. This goes from shapefile to CAD, and it takes user input through a published parameter. And we're going to take a quick look at that here. Oops, I want to open the definition of it instead of the value. So I can select my polygon, and this is what allows me to select my polygon. And I'm reading from shapefile here. I'm going to just give that a run so we can take a look at that. that was a success. And we've got our source data in here that you guys have sort of taken a peek at, but I'm going to open that up as well. And that's our same data here. We've got our path type, facility ID, descriptions, ref numbers. And that is our data, plain and boring, one color, not really split up yet like we have in our AutoCAD. So this next part here, we're just clipping to that bounding box that we've selected in that geometry picker. And we're making sure that we've got the same reprojection or the same coordinate system in order to do that clipping process. Otherwise, there's no overlay and no clipping occurs. And finally, we're handling some attributes and writing out to AutoCAD. There is a whole tutorial on this by Liz in our knowledge base, and it is in our slides, so you can definitely take a look at that for step-by-step. And that is it for the self-serve data request. Let's head back into the slides and prepare our wrap-up. I did want to mention that I used a template DWG file in my writer to set up these colors and layer names, line weights, and line styles. So you can use a AutoCAD template, and that saves you a lot of time, and that's how I got those different colors there. Pressing down, pressing next. There we go. That's just the workspace. So some resources. We have our latest blog posts, and Tiana's been hard at work creating these GIS and CAD blog posts. We've got our links in here, so definitely go check those out, as they contain a lot of information and will direct you to more technical articles as well to work on those. We've also got our tutorials in our community. I was using that geometry picker in FME Server 1, which was that last app I showed you for the data download. So I had published that as a data download service rather than a streaming service. And then some AutoCAD and GIS tutorials. You can find a whole list of FME tutorials if you go into our knowledge base, and it's in the bottom right under learning materials. And we're all about those free resources. So don't hesitate to join in the community, ask us questions. How-to questions are really great there in our community. It's just full of support, and people will offer suggestions on what to do next. We have live training, live online, and recorded training. So if you don't have time to join at that particular time slot, you can work through them on your own as well as those articles I mentioned. If you have a problem or if you think you found a bug, definitely reach out to our support cases. And if you're just stuck for the moment looking for that next resource, come find us in live chat. So don't hesitate to reach out.
I want to thank everybody for such insightful, good questions and other observations and even the kind words. But the one that did come up that I did think was interesting was people asking about a problem I did gloss over when going from CAD to GIS, and that is the problem of coordinate system. Where the heck is this data on the planet? And I remember early days of SAFE, I was doing support and somebody phoned in that was a MapInfo user, and they said, FME doesn't work going from AutoCAD to MapInfo. And I said, why not? And they said, well, because when it comes into MapInfo, it doesn't have a coordinate system. And I explored some more, and this person had only ever used MapInfo, and in MapInfo, there always was a coordinate system, and they couldn't conceive of the idea that a file wouldn't have a coordinate system. And when I finally made it clear that no, it's very likely that your CAD file just doesn't even have a coordinate system, they said, well, this is going to be a problem. And indeed, it is. And so this is what people have asked. FME itself does not provide an interactive tool to help you sort out the coordinate system of an unknown CAD file. I will say that our friends over at Esri have made a really nice tool. I don't remember what it's called, but there's a tool that you can use inside of ArcGIS that you can grab onto a CAD file and then drag it into the right spot against a base map, and then it will write out a .wld file, and FME will honor the WLD file. In Esri as well, you can write out a .prj, and FME will honor that if we pick it up. And if there is a coordinate system inside there, we will honor that as well. We can read those out of AutoCAD files if they're modern and they have a coordinate system. But very often, stuff is got euphemistically called a local coordinate system, and you have to figure out an offset and shift and manually type it in. In the case of that old CAD file I started with, I knew that that was UTM 1083 or 83-10, and I could have typed that in, And I also knew that the subunits were the meters and not the master units. And that's the kind of thing that has to be fiddled with and can be annoying, but hopefully that some of those things I just said can help folks with this hard problem.
Totally agree. And in my last demo there, I already knew that my file was UTM-8310, and writing it to CAD, I did specify to keep that coordinate system as an internal WKT or well-known text. But I could have also wrote out a companion file, such as a PRJ.
Right. Someone as Taha has said that's called a sign projections. That must be the tool inside of, or a georeference tool. Anyway, there's a few different ones inside there.
Nice.